So, hello everyone, and welcome back to another video, and the Parents PC saga continues. I have worked on the PC a little bit. You can see the case is different, because I have actually found a Cooler Master K280, I think is what this is called. And this is the case that my original first PC had. It's not the exact same unit. Mine got cut up to become a test bench once, but this is my sister's old case, who had a very, very similar PC to my first PC. And since she doesn't use this case anymore, I put the parents' PC in it. And what this config is right now, I said this before in the previous video, this is basically my dream PC from my early years of being into overclocking and stuff. And I'm just gonna pop the side panel out. And yeah, so this is basically what my first PC looked like. Of course, I had an Intel stock heatsink, I had a GTX 650, I didn't have a Z series motherboard, so this is very much better than my first PC, but this is basically what it looked like. Same case, and same overall dimensions and whatnot. But yeah, so to reiterate, the hardware in this is an i7-4790, 16 gigabytes of DDR3. The motherboard is an ASRock Z97M Pro 4. The graphics card is a GTX 780 Ti. We have a 400 watt power supply. It is actually 2 4-volt rails. That's a bit concerning, because that graphics card is gonna sip like at least 250 watts. But it's been fine so far, so yeah. Then we also have a 500 gigabyte hard drive. Now my original one had a 2 terabyte, but this is just an old hard drive I found. And then there's a 128 gigabyte SSD down here, which is also what I had, but mine was a Samsung. This is a Kingston unit. And then there's also an optical drive, which is not connected because I only have 2 SATA cables. And yeah, so this is basically what my dream PC was back then. Now, my actual PC that I had a GTX 650 and an i5-3570 on a B75 motherboard with only 8 gigabytes of RAM and an Intel stock heatsink. So my PC was quite a lot slower than this. So again, this was my dream PC back then. I loved the 2080, not the 20. I loved the 780 Ti, still kind of do. I actually also wanted this exact model from MSI, because back then I didn't know that the reference PCB sucks. But yeah, I visually like the heatsink a lot. So yeah, and like the heatsink is basically like, it barely fits in here. So it's basically as big of heatsink as you can put in this. And yeah, I always wanted, I kind of wanted a K. This is not a K, so it's not quite my dream system. Also, the RAM's like just 1600, 999 something. Like, it's not very fast RAM. The motherboard isn't that great either, but this should come pretty close to what I would have wanted, because back then I didn't know what good RAM or good motherboard or whatnot is. I only cared that my CPU and graphics card model number is the highest. So yeah. So what I thought I was gonna do with this video is hook this PC up and try to play some games on it. Just to kind of, have the opportunity to actually play with close to my dream config from back then, to just kind of see how it would have been if I ever had this config back then, and maybe also to see what this can still do today. So yeah, basically I'm making this video because someone asked if this thing can play Destiny 2 on the last video, and yes it can. I used to play Destiny on my old system, which by then I also had a 780 Ti, not the MSI one, I had a gigabyte, but on my old i5 still, and that played Destiny badly, but it played it. So I know that this can already, I know that this can play it, but I'm gonna be testing other games too, So we can just kind of see how this is gonna go. My prediction is that it's probably gonna be fine for 1080p 60 Hz at pretty much whatever settings you want in most games, except newer AAA titles. But I expect that when we try to get like high refresh rate titles to work, the CPU is probably gonna be holding us back quite a lot, because single core performance on this thing isn't all that great. It's a Haswell, actually it's a Devil's Canyon. It's not overclockable. The RAM's also kind of slow. So I think the weakest link is not actually the graphics card. I think the weakest link is the single core performance of the CPU, which we're gonna feel in high refresh rate scenarios. I did overclock it a little bit. I left the graphics card stock because first off, the power supply is a bit concerning, and this is a reference PCB card. It can't really do that much anyway. But I put the base clock to 102 from 100, so we get like, I think like, what is it? 70 extra megahertz or something like that on the CPU, and like also a little bit on the RAM. So like, yeah, it's 2% faster than stock. I tried 132, that didn't post, so 102 is the best that you can get out of the CPU because it is locked and it does have a BCLK restriction. But yeah, so let's not waste any more time. I'm gonna put the side panel back on, plug the fan in because it really needs it. It only has this one intake, so the side intake is very much needed for the graphics card. But yeah, I'm gonna put this back together, hook it up, and then we're gonna see what kind of games this can play. So in my preferred game of choice back then, Minecraft, we got a somewhat acceptable frame rate at 16 chunks. However, well, the CPU was kind of occupied when loading in chunks. Now everything's loaded in, it's nice and low on the usage, but it even got quite toasty on that big heatsink. Like, yeah. Let's see what happens if we load in more chunks. Yup. Oh, that CPU is struggling. It might have 8 threads, but only 4 cores. And that is showing. Like, Minecraft's engine, or just running the game, got quite a lot harder over the years, especially after the extension and like how high and deep you can go in the game, and just, yeah, it got quite CPU heavy, which is why we're only seeing 100 FPS, because I used to get like way more than that even on my GTX 650, though admittedly the graphics card is not the problem here. But yeah, running Minecraft still works, but the CPU is definitely sweating a little bit. Now, another game that I used to play a lot is Planetside 2, and right here it's actually running on ultra settings. Now, I'm not really in the middle of a big fight. There's a max population queue on one continent right now, and the other one's basically empty. So not much going on here, but we're on ultra settings, and that's pretty good FPS. Back then, my monitor was 60 Hz, so that exceeds the maximum frame rate it can really display, and now the graphics card's really stretching its legs, and yeah, the case is not very good for temperatures. You're already in the like almost 70. The core clock's not very good. The voltage is actually surprisingly high for a reference card, and the CPU is still pretty close to the limit. Considering that there's not really a lot going on in the game right now, that's pretty high CPU usage, because once you have a big battle where there's like 96 versus 96 players, that's gonna pack all the cores. Like, this game gets really, really low FPS once you have a big battle, no matter how big your CPU is. So, yeah, but at least now we have like 20, 25 FPS to spare on top of what we should have. So, yeah, Planetside running pretty well. Even though it did get optimizations over time, and they actually downgraded the ultra graphics a little bit. But yeah, runs fine on this machine still. So here's an example for a newer game. This is Stray running on high settings, and we're hovering pretty much exactly around the 60 FPS that we want to have. And there's actually still some headroom left in the graphics card, so the 780 Ti is doing a lot better than I thought it would in this game, especially since I heard it's rather heavy. CPU usage also rather low. Of course, this is not a very huge scene right here, but there is quite a lot of graphical fidelity in this. So, yeah, it's doing pretty well in this game. So, here's Destiny 2, and yeah, 60 FPS is definitely in it. I'm in a strike right now, so there is actually stuff going on, and we are managing good FPS, and this is on the high preset. So 60 FPS, definitely in there. And if we go to medium and low, we might even get into high refresh rate area. The graphics card is very much the limit here. The CPU is also doing stuff, but there is still up. But like, yeah, the graphics card is very much the limitation. So yeah. So let's actually try if we can get better settings. We just go to low settings and let's see how that works. Yeah, it's a little better. That's like 25 FPS more. But 144 Hz capable. This is probably not with this graphics card. And that's pretty much what I experienced back then when I used to play this game on my old system, which also had a 780 Ti. Back then I had a 60 Hz screen, so I didn't really care that much, but yeah, 780 Ti and it's not that great anymore for Destiny, especially a reference card like this. We are at a fairly low core clock. So yeah, FPS wise it's not the best, but it is definitely playable. But yeah, the graphics card is showing its age in this one. Okay, one last game. Here we have PUBG on high settings, and again, pretty good FPS. That's way better than I would have expected out of a 780 Ti. I actually still remember playing this game when it was like really new and like in early access still on my other 780 Ti, and it was really struggling. It got like 40 to 60 FPS. And it's nice to see that the game has been optimized quite a lot, that it will now run on high settings on hardware like the 780 Ti just fine. And we even have a decent amount of other players around here in the starting area, so looks pretty good. CPU usage, also not all that bad. Graphics card, yeah, it's stretching its legs. It is at the max, but we are getting pretty good FPS. And when we're up here in the air, we even get better FPS, and like the high settings, we even have things rendering in down there already. So yeah, I'm kind of impressed with how PUBG performs on this. It used to be a lot worse. Like, this game has come a long way since it released in like when, 2016. So that's pretty good, I would say. So, conclusion time then. I am pleasantly surprised how fast the system actually still is. Now the CPU really is nearing its limit in a lot of games, and if I had tested like a really recent AAA game, I'm pretty sure the system would have walked more than run. But like games that I usually play, now I would have loved to test Destiny, but well, it just doesn't want to work. Even like completely fresh reinstalling it just doesn't work. But the other games, like, I was surprised how well Stray runs. I've heard people say that this game runs really badly, and on this old hardware, like November 2013, this came out. Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised how well this still runs. And like Planetside 2, yeah, that's probably the worst one, because that one just hammers the CPU. Even modern CPUs have kind of a problem with that game. But Stray ran well, PUBG ran well, Minecraft, actually also is probably the second heaviest for this system, just because of the CPU. Like, the CPU is the weakest link in this. Now, a 780 Ti these days, especially because of the 3 gigabytes of VRAM, is not really something you want to run these days, but in terms of raw power, it's doing pretty well. Like, if you lower down the texture resolution, this card can, like, 1080p, like 60 Hz, yeah. You can probably even do high refresh rate if you pair it with a decently powerful CPU. So, yeah, the system can play games. It sure can play games. So, yeah, like, it's kind of amazing that this thing is, like, well, it's not November, it's September 2022. This is coming up on 9 years old, at least for the graphics card. The CPU is also from around the same time. Like, that you can still get passable performance out of a system this old, I found that kind of cool. Like, 10 years ago, having a system this old would have probably not even supported the operating system anymore. Well, maybe it probably did, but like, running games would be kind of hard. But yeah, hey, at least for the games that I used to play, or play right now, yeah, it's better than I expected, actually. Now, it isn't very great. High refresh rate gaming is gonna be kind of a problem in CPU heavy games. But yeah, it's definitely still, like, it was a really, really fast system once, and it's still usable today. So I think with that we can end this small project on how well the old system actually performs. And yeah, I might play a few more things on this. Maybe I can actually get Destiny 2 to work. That would be kind of cool. But yeah, maybe I'm gonna play a little bit on this for old time's sake and for just kind of living my former dream system that I never really ended up getting. But anyway, yeah, so I don't really want to make the video any longer now, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.